Welcome to the Soho Forum. We are pleased. We are pleased. We are pleased to be debating the issue, government restrictions on the immigration of peaceful and healthy people make sense from a libertarian standpoint, especially in present-day America. Speaking for the affirmative, Dave Smith. Dave, please come to the stage. Speaking for the negative, Alex Nowrasteh. Alex, please come to the stage. Watch here. Dave, you have 15 minutes to make your case. Please close the voting. Lucas, take it away, Dave.
Thank you, Jim. Hey, what's up, guys? How's everybody doing? Thank you guys very much for coming out. Thank you, Gene, and thank you, Alex, for being here. I used to be at like every Soho Forum debate back in a time when I had less commitments and babies. And so this is very nice to be back, and it's great to see a lot of familiar faces. Me and, look, I don't know if you guys have been keeping up with me, but it's nice to do one debate where I'm not going to piss off the Jews. You know what I mean? Like, that's pretty huge for me these days. Okay, sorry. But you guys got it. The whole thing about the Jews. Anyway, okay. So, this is, me and Alex have, over the years, we have traded some not so friendly tweets back and forth, but I do want to start by saying that I really am grateful to Alex for coming here today. Even when we were not getting along on Twitter, I've always genuinely respected Alex's intelligence, and I think he is somebody who really has a mastery of the data on this issue, unlike many others. And I think this is an issue that maybe the one thing me and Alex would agree on is that it's an issue that's really important that libertarians get right, especially today, because this is the issue that's gotten the sitting president of the United States of America elected twice. It was the central issues of his campaign. According to almost all of the opinion polls through the 2024 presidential election, immigration was either number one or number two. And so the question before us tonight is whether libertarians ought to support restrictions on immigration, or at least in some categories. So I would start with this. It's something that kind of everybody in the room knows already, but really the foundational principle of libertarianism is all orbits around voluntarism, voluntary exchanges. Now, people will start at different starting points, but basically that's what it is to be a libertarian, is to believe in even things like property rights, the non-aggression principle. All of them are essentially built around the idea that we prefer voluntary exchange and we reject coercion or aggression. And there are different types of libertarians who are libertarians for different reasons, some more radical than others, but that kind of is the centerpiece of what you're arguing for. If you're arguing for a libertarian society, you're arguing for more voluntary exchanges and less coercion. And if that's your starting point, and then your end point is supporting a policy that you would have to support in order to reject this resolution, that would essentially be saying, you are going to drastically change almost every aspect of our society against the will of almost all of the people who live here. I would humbly suggest you've messed up somewhere along the line. Like if your kid brought you their homework and their starting point was everything should be voluntarily, every exchange should be voluntary, and their end point was I am going to force on hundreds of millions of people their nation to be changed radically in almost every area you could imagine, culturally, politically, religiously, all types of different areas. If that is your end point, I think it's worth re-examining how you got there. And I'm saying here that again, if you look at where the American people are, there are kind of, it's hard to get a gauge exactly. Like almost no pollster will ever ask, do you support open borders, or close to something where there's no restrictions except for violent or ill people, two fairly arbitrary limitations. Almost no one will ask that question, but if you look at where the American people are on immigration, it's nowhere near there. And it's about as much of a consensus on any issue as you could find in America that people reject Alex's position on this. Now, by the way, that is not that does not mean Alex is wrong. I certainly hold lots of positions that the overwhelming majority of people would reject. I'm not making an appeal to democracy or an appeal to popularity. I'm making an appeal to voluntarism. My argument is that if the people of a country do not wish to have a large number of immigrants coming in, then it is not a voluntary transaction to force that on them. And I think one of the things that libertarians, have a little bit of an issue with on this is that it certainly does seem as a reasonable starting point, and this is why I used to favor more of an open borders view, it seems as a reasonable starting point that we don't want the government doing anything to anyone. We don't want the government stopping somebody who's not aggressing or committing some type of violent crime. But the truth is that we find ourselves in an awkward position when it comes to immigration, because immigration is a government policy. Whether you have open borders or closed borders or anything in between, as long as the government is controlling those borders and the government is dictating immigration policy, what you have is a government program. And if you have a scenario where, let's say, 95% of the American people oppose an immigration system that would say anybody can come here as long as you're not sick or as long as you're not violent, you can come here. The overwhelming, it might be substantially higher than 95%, to be honest. We could get into the polls later, but there's been a lot of efforts, I think at times from the Cato Institute, to kind of spin the polls and say, support for higher immigration has gone up. A Cato, piece would read 10 years ago. And it's like, yeah, it's gone up to 17%. 17% support more immigration. What percentage actually supports what this type of policy would lead toward? Very, very few. So you have the overwhelming majority of the American people who do not support this policy. And as Brian Kaplan, who I also consider to be one of the most brilliant minds that libertarians have, as he has admitted himself, or I don't know if he would consider it an admission, but from 1965 to today, higher levels of immigration have always been unpopular. Single-digit support for most of the years, higher levels of immigration. The American people have consistently, since 1965, said, we do not want this immigration policy. We want less people coming into the country, not more. Now, I will point this out, before I get into a little bit more of this argument, I will point out that, and I don't think I'm making a pedantic point here, I think this is actually very crucial to the debate. It is impossible to oppose this resolution unless you support unrestricted open borders, period. Like zero restrictions. Because even if you're going to argue, as Alex has in the past, and many other of his Cato colleagues, for an Ellis Island style system, you're still supporting an enormous restriction on peaceful and healthy people, because it's a prior restraint on their freedom of movement. So in other words, if the government were to say outside this venue, they were going to set up an Ellis Island style checkpoint, okay? And you had to go through this checkpoint in order to continue traveling down the road. And this meant, let's make it real Ellis Island standards. You were going to get a health and psychological evaluation, including being forced to disrobe, having your eyelids checked. If you were older, you were going to be passed on for additional screening. You would be held for at least hours, in many cases days, in extreme cases months and even years, before you were granted the right to continue traveling, Me, Gene, Alex, and every single person in this room would consider this to be an egregious violation of our liberty. We would all say, you're Joseph Stalin if you support that policy. And yet Alex and many of his colleagues will support that policy when it comes to immigration. It's almost like they're kind of admitting immigration is different. It's a different situation. And once you support something like an Ellis Island style, system, it's the, the old bit where the man asks the woman, will you sleep with me for $10 million? And she says, okay. And he goes, will you sleep with me for $1? And she says, who do you think I am? And he says, we've already established who you are. Now we're just negotiating. Now, so often, many of the people who will argue for open borders or quasi-open borders will not bite the bullet and say there should be absolutely no restrictions, but they argue as if they do believe that. Now, the fundamental point that I think libertarians need to understand here about whether our position should be open or closed or anything in between is that this all comes down to the issue of government property. Governments are the ones who control the borders. Now, there are some areas of the US border that are privately owned, and by the way, the people who privately own that land have been demanding that the government serve its only legitimate function and protect private property and protect them from trespassers, for which the government has not been doing its only legitimate job. But the point is that many libertarians will act as if it's a given that there ought to be no restrictions on government property. But that simply isn't true. It's not deduced from libertarian principles, and none of us would apply that standard in life in general. Alex shared recently, as this debate was coming up, he shared a meme, which I'm not holding him to the argument of the meme. I understand he can present his argument tonight. But I did think there was something interesting about this. He shared a meme, and it was like, on my side of the meme was like, all the mental gymnastics you have to do to be a libertarian to support closed borders, and it's like Manette taxpayers, or they're going to vote for Democrats, or a bunch of different steps. And on Alex's side, it was just one guy who said government property is illegitimate. And it's like, okay. Now, I understand that's not exactly your argument. My point is just that many of the people who argue for this lax immigration policy, they act as if that's the pure libertarian position. But ask yourself, is that really the pure libertarian position? Is it the case that if the government is currently in control of some property, that therefore there ought to be zero restrictions? If that were the case, then public schools could not tell a random 55-year-old drug addict that he can't enter the school and hang out in the girls' bathroom. Why? Would you restrict someone's freedom of movement? Would you say that all government property, you should be able to scream obscenities in a public library, that you should be able to lay down and camp out in the middle of a freeway? Is it wrong? Is the libertarian position that since a government has control of a highway, therefore they cannot institute a speed limit? That the speed limit ought to be whatever you can do? I don't think that actually follows. I think that if we recognize that taxation is theft, and we recognize that governments are built off aggression, they built and maintained public property with tax dollars that they took at the threat of violence from the American people. And what the American people want them to do with those tax dollars ought to play somewhat of a role. Now, I'm not arguing, as some other libertarians have, and I think they overstate the case a little bit, that public property is owned by the taxpayers or owned by the net taxpayers. I'm simply arguing that the American people have a better claim than others do, which is really, I think, the fundamental, what property rights kind of starts as. But the idea that if the American government is doing something, it ought to be for the American people. It ought to be in their interest. If there is a local public school and there's a group of people in the community who have been paying property taxes into this school for many, many years, I think that school ought to serve those people's interests and not equally the interests of the world. Look, there's nowhere in libertarian principles where you can deduce that because I stole something from you, it is now unowned or owned equally by everyone in the world. If taxation is theft, and everything that the government has built and maintained has been done so by robbing the American people, well then, the rightful owners are still the American people. Now, I'm not saying it's completely possible to divvy that up perfectly, but you know it's definitely possible to not do what 95+% of the American people don't want, which is to open the borders. And I would just, I would say this, I'll try to leave on this, which is a thought experiment. I did not come up with this, it was the great Scott Horton, but I've been known for regurgitating his stuff in the past, and I'm not gonna stop now. Imagine, if you will, I know this is an extreme to paint a picture, but imagine there's a little conflict right now between India and Pakistan. They both have nuclear weapons. Pakistan nukes India. Somehow India is able to get 500 million people who want to immigrate here. They all come, 500 million all come to America. Is it really the libertarian position? And let's say, hypothetically, 100% of the American people don't want them. We don't want this to happen. Is the libertarian position really, sorry, you lose your country. There's nothing you're allowed to do. You will now culturally and racially and religiously, every tradition that you have is gone. You live in a completely different country now, and you know what? You have to take that. And even if very powerful people happen to be funding it because they like that for their agenda, if the libertarian position is that you have to take that, we have all messed up somewhere along the lines. Thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Dave. You get an extra 22 seconds because Dave generously was allowed by you to have those extra 22, which were pretty crucial. Take it away, Alex.
Well, thank you to the Soho Forum, Gene, Nick at Reason, and Dave Smith for debating tonight. I will make 3 points in this debate. 1, libertarian first principles require the free movement of peaceful and healthy people. 2, evidence shows that immigration is beneficial to Americans. And 3, government immigration restrictions are how tyranny will come to the United States. Dave is defending the resolution, quote, government restrictions on the immigration of peaceful and healthy people make sense from a libertarian standpoint, especially in present-day America, unquote. That resolution is nonsensical from a libertarian position. Dave would see it clearly if he were asked to support resolutions with a one-word difference, like, quote, government restrictions on the private property, or drug use, or gun ownership of peaceful and healthy people make sense from a libertarian standpoint, especially in present-day America. But he doesn't see it when it comes to immigration. Every strand of libertarian thought, from natural rights theory to ethical intuitionism and consequentialism, requires free movement, because immigration laws are government rules that attack our rights and restrict peaceful, voluntary exchange. Government restrictions on the immigration of peaceful and healthy people violates every strand of libertarian thought. Immigration laws are government regulations enforced by the state. We're not talking about trespassers on private property. We're talking about government laws and regulations that prevent you, all of you, from using your property as you see fit and from voluntarily interacting with others. Every immigration restriction infringes both on the rights of the immigrants and on your rights to associate with them. Libertarians care about first principles, but we also care about the consequences. We begin with a presumption of liberty, which can be overcome if immigration causes serious harm. Now, that's not the case here. Immigration consequences are overwhelmingly positive. Empirical economic research shows that immigrants pay more in taxes than they consume in benefits, or, at worst, break even. That includes costs like government schools, welfare, and criminal justice, which they all use less than native-born Americans. They are less likely to be arrested, convicted of crimes, and incarcerated. Historically, more open immigration is associated with slower growth in the size of the federal government. At the state level, more immigration is either not related to changes in economic freedom or positively correlated. Benjamin Powell and I won an award for the best book in Austrian economics in 2022 for showing that immigration mostly increases economic freedom or has no effect. Immigrants are stopping socialism. They are not spreading it. Some immigrants use welfare in public schools. That's absolutely true. The libertarian response is to abolish the welfare state, not to expand government control over the borders. The problem is the government services, not the immigrants. Social Security's problem isn't the elderly, it's the government program itself. The problem with public schools isn't the children, it's the government schools. The problem with immigrant welfare use is the welfare state, not the immigrants. The far less extreme way to deal with this, rather than building a wall around the country, we should build a higher wall around the welfare state. Immigration restrictions are how tyranny will come to modern America. Dave has said in previous podcasts and other forums that he wants a full repeal of the progressive era. Now, I agree. The progressive era instituted immigration restrictions and passports to protect labor unions, promote nationalism, and adopt a U.S. government central plan of eugenics based on the science. America's borders were mostly closed to immigration from the late 1920s to the late 1960s. And what did we get during that time, huh? What great libertarian wonders? The New Deal, labor law, government enforced monopolies, union subsidies, the peacetime draft, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, Japanese internment, the CIA entangling foreign alliances like NATO, the military-industrial complex, the Great Society, and civil rights laws that restricted freedom of association, infringed on our private property, and expanded the state to previously unimagined size. That anti-libertarian time in American history was made possible by immigration restrictions and the practically closed borders that they instituted. Don't believe me? Well, listen to what Paul Krugman said. Quote, "The New Deal made America a vastly better place." I'm quoting him, by the way. Yet it probably wouldn't have been possible without immigration restrictions. Absent those restrictions, there would have been many claims, justified or not, about people flocking to America to take advantage of welfare programs, unquote. The Great Society was passed when the immigrant share of the U.S. population was the lowest in American history, including the colonial period. And that low point was caused by immigration restrictions on the movement of peaceful and healthy people. The Immigration Act of 1965 slightly, just slightly, liberalized immigration. And what happened after then? Union subsidies fell. Labor law was liberalized. You're noticing a pattern here. I really don't like unions. The number of government monopolies fell. Growth in the size of government actually slowed. Taxes were cut. Trade was liberalized, and the draft was abolished. Those liberalizations did not happen when the borders were closed. They only happened after they were slightly, barely reopened. Immigration restrictions are the health of the state and a declaration of war on our freedoms. They are also some of the most economically devastating, complex, and Soviet-style laws in the United States. You may have noticed there's a piece of paper on your chairs, a very highly simplified map of the legal immigration system. And it is simplified, and it's only part of it. But the point to understand about immigration law is it is the exact opposite of every other portion of American law and our Anglo-Saxon system of jurisprudence. Every other portion of law, it says specifically what is not allowed. But everything else is fine. There's no law that says Dave and I can shake hands, right? But there's a law that says he can't punch me in the face. Okay, that makes sense. Immigration law is the opposite. It says all immigration is illegal except what the government specifically allows. If you fit into a narrow Soviet-style category, then maybe if you apply and wait 20, 30, 50 years, yeah, you can get in. Otherwise, there is no way for you to come in. It is the opposite of our legal traditions. To support government immigration restrictions and mass deportations means that you must also support the methods of actually enforcing those laws. These enforcement methods are some of the most anti-libertarian laws in existence. Examples: Trump designated drug cartels as terrorists and is considering designating some gang members arrested inside of the U.S. as enemy combatants to stop immigration. Trump wanted to send U.S. troops to Mexico to fight a war against terrorist cartels. He deployed the military to the border. He used the Alien Enemies Act to deport migrants to prison camps in El Salvador without due process. The Alien Enemies Act allows federal officers, ICE agents, to enter houses without a warrant to arrest migrants the president designates as terrorists or invaders. Most federal law enforcement officers actually work to enforce immigration laws. Every time you travel, you must show your papers. Every time you get a job, you must fill out the I-9 form to prove to the government that you are complying with immigration laws. Many states and the federal government require employers to check your papers against federal databases through the E-Verify system when you apply for a job. And, mark my words, E-Verify will be used for gun checks. It's just a matter of time. Every significant proposal for a national biometric identity card is designed to enforce immigration laws. There are vaccine mandates for immigrants. The government is deporting green card holders, like Mahmoud Khalil, arrested without a warrant, by the way. The government lied about that, of course, because he expressed an opinion that contradicts American foreign policy toward Israel. Foreign students, like Rumeysa Ozturk, are being deported for writing op-eds critical of Israel. A French scientist was denied entry for a scientific conference because he had phone messages critical of President Trump. America has a secret gulag for immigration offenders. A German green card holder named Fabian Schmidt lives in New Hampshire. He was arrested, held incommunicado, and literally tortured by ICE. He ended up in the hospital. They tried to make him sign a paper to give up his green card. Irish green card holder Cleona Ward, arrested and held for 17 days after returning for the U.S. And you know what she did? They found that she had a 20-year-old marijuana charge in a state that had recently legalized marijuana. An Australian on a work permit returned from a funeral in his home country was arrested by customs and deported for no good reason, separated from his job, his apartment, his property, and his spouse. 2 other German tourists, a Canadian with a visa, and several Brits were disappeared for weeks in immigration detention and not allowed to contact lawyers. Other German tourists were strip-searched, detained, deported after arriving legally because Trump's customs agents didn't think their travel schedules were detailed enough. A Russian scientist at Harvard named Ksenia Petrova was detained by ICE for 8 weeks for the heinous crime of failing to deport frog embryos as part of her research on a flight from France. Trump shipped migrants, 40% of whom have no criminal convictions or charges against them, to America's prison camp in Guantanamo Bay. Trump activated the Wartime Enemy Aliens Act to deport non-criminal migrants, 20% of whom weren't even illegal immigrants, with limited or no due process, to El Salvador's prisons and bribed the government there with your tax dollars to take them in. One man was deported illegally, and when a judge ruled he had to be returned, Trump's administration said, sorry, we can't do anything about it. Trump's administration lawyers wrote in a March 14th memo that the Alien Enemies Act allows ICE agents to enter private property without a warrant. The government is using eminent domain to take private property from people along the border to build a wall. Libertarians who support mass deportations are not defending private property rights. They are really defending the power of the government to violate your private property. ICE arrested a native-born American citizen by pulling him off the street in Chicago into an unmarked van and held him overnight until they checked his wallet to discover he was a citizen. Native-born American Jose Hermosillo was arrested in Arizona and held in immigration detention for 10 days incommunicado because he wasn't carrying his papers. Immigration enforcers go to schools, churches, courthouses to arrest peaceful people, operate with near impunity in a 100-mile buffer zone along America's borders where they run internal checkpoints, harass Americans and immigrants, and frequently enter private property without permission. ICE agents make arrests without warrants and then just create them for themselves in the field after the arrests. ICE recently bragged that part of its job is keeping out, quote, ideas that cross our borders illegally, unquote. Show your papers to travel near the border. Carry your papers or you'll be in ICE detention for weeks. Show your papers to get a job, all for immigration enforcement. The U.S. is becoming a your papers please society to enforce immigration laws are the type that Dave is defending tonight. Trump's Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, said the administration was considering suspending the writ of habeas corpus because we're being invaded by illegal immigrants. Finally, Trump and his press secretary have said that they are considering deporting American citizens to prison camps in El Salvador. You heard me right. They are considering deporting American citizens to prison camps in El Salvador. The last person to try to exercise this much power here was named George III. If tyranny comes to the United States, it will come to enforce immigration laws. Immigration laws can only be enforced by the heavy hand of the federal government. Do you really think all that is consistent with libertarianism? Dave endorsed mass deportations even over a month ago. Mass deportations require taking money from taxpayers at force and hiring unionized federal law enforcement officers to arrest people, rip them away from their families and property. In Trump's America, mass deportations require paying foreign autocrats taxpayer dollars to incarcerate non-criminals. Would Murray Rothbard or Ludwig von Mises support that? We got the populist immigration enforcement regime that Dave wants, and it's leading the United States down a dark road. Hearing people defend these immigration restrictions and the enforcement system that supports them makes people sound like they're defending COVID regime in May of 2020 or the Iraq War in 2006. Give it up. Immigration restrictions must be statist, and they can be populist. They can be conservative, progressive, nationalistic, socialistic, or autocratic, but they cannot be libertarian. Ron Paul recently said, quote, President Trump announced earlier in his second term that foreign students who engaged in illegal activity would be deported. Most people agreed with this. But then his DHS began showing up with masks and plain clothes and arresting people. It's a slippery slope that will backfire on those who support it, unquote. Shortly after Ron Paul said that, Dave Smith said, I support mass deportations. Ron Paul is correct, Dave is wrong. They may want mass deportations without the atrocities, but communists say they want equality without the starvation and death camps too. In both cases, the trade-off is our liberty. Immigration restrictions break a lot of eggs. For a libertarian to support those violations of rights, the government's mass deportation regime had better be cooking up a pretty tasty libertarian omelet. Dave has not made any argument these rights violations and increased state power will do so. Even if you don't care about immigrants, whatever they do to immigrants, they're going to do to you eventually. The worst infringement on the liberties of Americans in our lifetime was the COVID lockdowns. Horrible tyranny, unspeakable and unimaginable that we lived through that in this country. Immigration restrictions, I just have a few more seconds, of the kind Dave defends are like a permanent global COVID lockdown, complete with a vaccine passport. Mass deportations and immigration restrictions require a domestic police state like the one we're seeing growing up around us. He desires the government deporting people who broke immigration restrictions, so he desires a tax-funded internal security state to do so. Dave can defend statist mass deportations if he wishes. He can defend permanent global COVID-style immigration lockdowns on peaceful and healthy people if he wants, but he cannot do so while claiming to represent libertarianism. Thank you.
Thank you. 5 minutes. 5 minutes of rebuttal from Dave. Take it away, Dave.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, listen, I'll be honest, I'm a little bit surprised with Alex's opening. I think if the resolution tonight was Trump's doing a great job with his immigration enforcement, that would have been a very powerful opening. I think if the resolution was, should libertarians support mass deportations, he would have at least started to make the argument there. But really just nothing is touching the resolution that we're actually here to argue. Which is, the question really is, do we have to embrace an immigration system that would undoubtedly result in an orders of magnitude increase in the number of immigrants coming into this country against the wishes of almost all of the American people? That's really the question, and nothing that he said really touches my argument, so I'll be interested to see his rebuttal. I guess there's a few things that I should respond to. Number one, I will say, I think this is a bit goofy, the direction Alex went in terms of saying that, like, when the periods of large immigration, the government was being reduced, and during periods of slow immigration, therefore that's responsible for the things that followed. The truth is that the way, I'm pretty sure, because I've listened to some of his presentations on this topic, the way Alex is calculating whether the size of government grew or shrank is by government spending as a percentage of GDP, which no libertarian should ever use as a metric for how you rate how big or small the government is. It's on the level of, like, if I made $100,000 a year and I have one gun, that's my home security, is my gun. And then the next year I got a big raise and now I make $1 million a year. So I got 5 more guns. And then a friend of mine would go, hey, you sure got a lot more guns. And I'd go, actually, I have less guns as a percentage of GDP. But the point is you have more guns, right? So if you want to look at, since 1965 and the immigration reforms, the size and scope of government has enormously grown. And I don't know if you've been looking around and haven't noticed it, but we haven't had a smaller government as we've been having more immigrants come into the country. In addition to that, I think that listen, if we have time to get into some of this, I'm happy to. I'm very skeptical about a lot of the claims that Alex makes, and we could get into the studies, I've read through them, in terms of immigrants committing less crime or immigrants contributing more than they take out of welfare programs. This is actually kind of misleading to make those claims, and I think if you actually look at the data, it might be the case, but is not really conclusive, actually. But I just want to be very clear. All of that is completely beside the point. That has nothing to do with how libertarians ought to feel about this. The only question that really matters is, do the American people have more of a claim over America than the rest of the world does? Because if that's true, then the question is this a voluntary transaction? So in other words, I do stand-up comedy. I tour on the road all the time. I go out about 2 weekends a month. Now, believe me, if it was up to my agent, I would be out every single day. He would have me at some strip mall every single weekend. I would work nonstop because he'll make more money if I do that. And the truth is, I'll make more money if I do that. But I got 2 little kids and a wife, and I kind of like spending time with them, so I limit the... Now, if someone came and put a gun to my head and said, you got to get out on the road every single day, I would make more money. That would be better for my GDP. But it's not libertarian. The question is it a voluntary transaction or not? And in terms of whether even if immigrants do commit less crime, which again, this is all based on the Texas homicide numbers, it's not very clear that this is the case. But if it's true that immigrants commit less crime, that still does not matter. Listen, Ann Coulter, who is not right about everything, but I did really like this example. She's the one who said, and I think she's right about this in her framework more than Alex is. Saying that immigrants commit fewer crime is kind of like if you had some food in your refrigerator and 50% of it was rotten. And then you went to the supermarket and you said, the food I got at the supermarket is only 20% rotten. Isn't that great? You'd be like, no. Because the expectation is the food that you're voluntarily bringing in is supposed to be 0% rotten. You're just bringing more rotten food in here. Even if illegal immigrants commit crime at a lower rate, that's still just more crime that we're inheriting. We already have to deal with the problems we have here. So the relevant question for libertarians is not what leads to economic growth or who has a higher or lower crime rate. The question is quite simple. Do the American people, we take in more immigrants than any other country in the world, legally. Do we have a right to cap it at any number? Or is it the case that it is incumbent on us, if we believe in liberty, to say you must take in the world if the world wants to come? Thank you.
If you support immigration restrictions, then you have to support the methods of actually enforcing those laws. You can't run away from that. If somebody was up here arguing that they want drug prohibition, oh, but they don't really want, the police to beat up anybody or arrest anybody, you wouldn't take it seriously, would you? Well, I don't take it seriously right now when Dave says he wants immigration restrictions, but, not all that little mean stuff that the government does, He doesn't like the mean stuff that the government does. Well, you can't pick and choose like that. That's one of the reasons why we are libertarians, is because we recognize that government is a blunt instrument, and that is all it is. Now, when he talks about the rights of Americans, or the rights of Americans choose who comes here, what he's really talking about is the power of the government. You have rights. The government does not have rights to make decisions for you. You have rights. If you want to hire somebody from overseas, if you want to marry them, you should not have to ask the government permission to do so. It is incumbent upon the government to prove that that person is a menace, or will come here and commit crimes, or will spread a virulent disease, or something like that. That is the way that we should frame these things. Not that you have to prove to the government, oh, please, can you please, let this guy in and make sure it satisfies with your central plan. No, there's no other area where we would be having this discussion when it comes to public policy. Not a single one. Immigration is the only one when it comes here. I'm also struck by Dave's consistent appeal to public opinion. We're talking about what libertarians should support. I want to remind you, the resolution of the debate is, quote, government restrictions on the immigration of peaceful and healthy people make sense from a libertarian standpoint, especially in present-day America. It's not, well, does the median voter in the United States want to increase immigration? That's not the resolution. Who cares? Like, we're not debating that. We're debating what libertarians should think about this. What's the proper mode and model for libertarians to think about this very crucial issue? Now, when he makes an analogy between government property and saying, well, they should behave like they're private property owners so that they can channel somehow magically the will of the median voter, as if the median voter matters for these types of things in order to manage property, that proves too much. The median voter, and the way that they manage their property, wants all types of crazy non-libertarian things. All types of things. Most people don't have guns in their house and don't want them. Does that mean that I can't carry my gun on the street because the median voter doesn't want that? I can't carry a gun concealed in my pocket? No libertarian would accept that response. None. But for some reason, we're supposed to accept it when it comes to an immigrant coming to the United States, who, by the way, they come here because people here want to interact with them. They want to hire them voluntarily. They want to sell stuff to them. They want to buy from them. If nobody in the United States wants anything to do with immigration, who's going to sell them a ticket to come here? Who's going to rent them an apartment? Who's going to give them a job and pay them voluntarily? Nobody. This is why we like capitalism. This is why libertarians like these things, because it's voluntary. If nobody wants to buy goods and services from the immigrants, then they will not come. Period. We talk about maybe hundreds of millions, billions of people coming here from around the world. Give me a break. 330 million people could move to New York tomorrow. Well, where are they? You know, if we take that logic to its extreme. We cannot look at the way that the state manages its property and reason to popularity. The real popularity is how Americans vote with their feet. It's how they vote with their dollars. And what do? They buy goods and services provided by immigrants. They hire them, they marry them, they move to cities where immigrants are disproportionately. They're not moving to West Virginia, folks. They're moving to places where there are more immigrants and there's more prosperity. The immigrants came here voluntarily. So what I want to say is, you know, there are absolutely concerns about these things. Oh, and by the way that we measure government growth over time and the size of the government, we have lots of different analyses in our books. The percentage of GDP, government spending as a percentage of GDP. We look at the economic freedom scores that have been calculated by organizations like Fraser and Cato. We look at other economic freedom scores calculated by Heritage. We look at the state level scores that are done by Jason Sorens and other people. So we have numerous different ways to take a look at the size of government. It's not just that. But what I want to just say is, if this were any other topic of public policy, if this were drugs, if this were private property issues, if this were the ownership of guns, if this were anything else, the answer to this from a libertarian perspective would be super obvious. Every argument that Dave has made against immigration is also an argument against people having children. They don't assimilate, they're not next taxpayers, and man, they're going to mess up our culture. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Before we move to the Q&A portion of the evening, that will involve 3 different kinds of Q&A. The audience will get a chance to ask questions. That will come a bit later. Each of the debaters will get a chance to ask each other a question. I'm going to exercise moderator's prerogative just initially to toss a couple of questions at our debaters. First, again, a point of clarification that I want to make clear. I am aware of the Fraser Institute's Economic Freedom Index, and only one of the criteria is government share of GDP. The other criteria have to do with rule of law, for example, with measurement of regulation, with other aspects that are non-budgetary about economic freedom. Do I understand you correctly to say, Alex, that you took those into account and that Dave is making a factual mistake in thinking that you only took government as a share of GDP? Is that correct?
That's correct. We looked at all these different measurements separately and numerous different analyses, including the book that I mentioned with Benjamin Powell and lots of other papers. We also looked at public opinion. We looked at numerous on public policy issues. So we looked at all of these different measures, yes.
Any comment from you, Dave?
Well, I didn't say that that was the only measure. I said I've seen Alex use this measure before. But so are you telling me that the government we have today is substantially smaller than the government in 1960?
No, my claim was that it has grown a lot more slowly since then. So the period of time when it grew the fastest was from about 1930 to the late 60s, and then it slowed down. And my theory for why immigration causes that is that immigration kills labor unions, and labor unions are the most successful progressive organization that lobbies and pushes for big government.
Oh, Dave, I just want to challenge you then. I'm familiar with the Economic Freedom Index of the Fraser Institute, Cato, and it was increasing from 1970 to 2000. It's still at highs. So if he did use a broad-based economic freedom index, and if it does tend to correlate over the last 50 years with the increase in immigration, would you agree then that there is some connection, that it's not just government? Would you agree with that, or do you still challenge it?
Agree that there's a connection what? Between
connection,
immigration and
a coincidence, at least. Economic Freedom Index, broadly defined, including all 5 criteria, only one of which is government, increased from 1970 to 2000, and is now sort of plateaued. So economic freedom generally has increased. Deregulation of various industries, all of that stuff. Would you concede then that there's some coincidence? You're not granting correlation, but definitely a coincidence.
No, I mean, I don't think I would. I think
Okay.
that it's sometimes, really smart people and really good scientists can overestimate how much science can really understand, and it's very difficult to measure how free exactly you think a society is.
Okay.
The size and scope of government has gotten dramatically bigger in that time period. If Alex wants to argue that it wasn't quite as rapid, I would probably, maybe he's right about that. I mean, obviously World War II has got to be the biggest, most dramatic expansion of, the pure power of the U.S. government. But no, that really none of that's the point anyway.
But you don't see deregulation of airlines, deregulation of trucking, deregulation of finance, a lot of movement toward economic freedom that occurred over this period that had nothing to do with government. Do you see?
Yes, I agree with you. Those
Okay.
things occurred over that period.
Okay,
Sure.
just a coincidence. All right. Not important, sorry to belabor. Alex, Milton Friedman has famously said, you can have a welfare state or you can have free immigration, but you can't have both. What do you say to that statement?
So the next line in that quote by Friedman is always forgotten. That's why Friedman supports illegal immigration, because they don't have access to the welfare state. And I think what we need to take a look at here is Friedman is making an empirical claim that immigrants use a ton of welfare, that more people are going to come. As a result of this, it's going to bankrupt the country and fleece the taxpayers. And that may have been true when Friedman said that. The evidence is it's absolutely not true now. And even if it is easier to build a higher wall around welfare than it is to build one around the country, and certainly more libertarian. Welfare is already pretty severely restricted in this country. It should be more restricted. I mean, I'd get rid of the entire welfare state if I could. But it already is fairly restricted. It should be more restricted. And that is something that we can build on, and I think certainly consistent, or at least partly consistent with libertarianism.
So I'm sorry, so you're not making the claim that I thought Brian Kaplan made. You're not claiming that even if we just did nothing, immigrants get less welfare, we would still have a pretty neutral fiscal effect from immigration, that the claims that immigrants are costly are invalid. Are you making that even if we did nothing?
Yes.
You are making that claim.
Yeah, I'm making that claim right now. So one of the big costs of people is public education. Enormously expensive, average of about $20,000 per student per year. Now, what happens when a 20-year-old moves here? We don't pay for any of their education, but they start working immediately. That is one of the big secrets in a lot of these fiscal welfare studies about how immigrants come in and how they're net taxpayers, is if somebody comes at the age of 20, even if they don't have much education, right? They start working, they're paying. Meanwhile, somebody like me, I went to school in Southern California. I cost that state like $200,000. I'm like $200,000 in the hole when I start working. It's gonna take me a lot of years to build up. I'm never paying California back, forget them. But but it's, immigrants come in right away and they're just like that. We get basically a freebie.
So, Dave.
I mean, the government gets a freebie.
Well, taxpayers get more workers in a larger economy, more friends,
but you were talking about
entrepreneurs,
paying taxes. Okay, the government gets more money.
Well,
what libertarians love, more taxes being paid.
Well, it's better than taxpayers getting fleeced by immigrants who take more. Certainly, it's better that way than that, right?
Yeah, Dave, I was going to ask you then. I thought that you were concerned with respect to, obviously, taxpayers pay for the education of immigrant children. So you don't like taxpayers being fleeced. It seems as though we're having difficulty this evening because we're going to get way into the numerical weeds. Alex is making the claim that immigrants are, with respect to the fiscal cost, including everything, including schooling, approximately neutral, that they are not costly. I believe you may. Do you doubt that? Do you regard it as irrelevant, or do you think that the opposite is the case? Are they costly to the taxpayer?
I doubt that. It's also irrelevant to my argument. But from what I've seen of studies that Alex has co-published himself, that oftentimes this will be over a 30-year horizon where we'll say then eventually the immigrants start paying it back. But the question, this is more fundamental, and you kind of can just think about this as a person and don't even have to worry about that. The question is, look, if somebody who, forget the way we use welfare, let's think of welfare the way libertarians think of welfare. It's everything the government does, essentially. So if you're saying there's an immigrant if there is an immigrant family who comes here uninvited, and they come into the country, immediately they have access to the roads, the fire departments, the police, the emergency room, the public schools, all types of things that the taxpayer is on the hook for. Now, if Alex wants to argue, and he has demonstrated in some of his studies, that those costs will be offset by later, those immigrants working, and then the second and third generation, fine, but it's the taxpayer ought to have some choice in whether they feel like laying out that money or not. And I don't think that the libertarian answer is to say that, like, if you're forced to essentially give a loan to someone but you get the money back, therefore that's libertarian. By the way, the point I was making before is that this is the nature of government, right? They screw you coming and going. It doesn't matter. If people are getting welfare services, then yeah, the taxpayer was forced to fund that. And if they end up paying more taxes, they're just giving this criminal organization that robs me and you more money. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality of the state.
One of the best observations by Ludwig von Mises in his theory of interventionism was that one government regulation or law causes other problems that then require other regulations to fix, in this sort of never-ending cycle till where you get total government control over society. So what we have here is Dave saying there are some problems caused by public schools, by welfare, and these other things, and the solution is even more government control over the movement of people across borders. I think he's falling into this trap that Ludwig von Mises identified as being one that leads increasingly toward more state and government control over the economy. And I think the duty, the goal, the point of libertarians is to push back against the state control, not to try to make little compromises here and there and try to play the political economy game as if there's more than like 50 of us in the entire world and we can control political outcomes. Is to try to think through what kind of system, what kind of rules maximize individual liberty, maximize our freedom, maximize our prosperity.
Can I ask Alex a question?
Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Yes.
Like a hypothetical question. Let's say there's a government, could be a foreign country. Let's say it's in Sweden. Yeah. The government is doing something me and you would both agree it shouldn't be doing. Yeah. And let's say you're there and you convince them all with your superior arguments. The government has a factory and it's producing shoes. and Alex, you convinced them that this should be privatized. Like, the government doesn't need to be in the business of making shoes. The market will do it much better. This factory should be privatized. And there were two proposals for privatization that were on the table. And so proposal A was, I don't know, something like, we're going to privatize this company and all of the taxpayers will get like a share in it, or the people who homesteaded it will get a share in it or something like that. And then proposal B was, we're going to privatize this company and it will 100% be owned by a Chinese firm. That had nothing to do with paying the taxes, nothing to do with building it, none of that. Is one of those proposals preferable to the other?
Depends whatever gets the maximum price. Whatever you sell the asset for at the highest price, which will partly, hopefully, compensate the poor Swedish taxpayer who's had to suffer,
well, why?
at least for a tax rebate for the crappy government shoes they've had to wear for so long.
Wait, so but hold on, Alex. I just want to be clear
so whatever
on this.
maximizes the price.
Hold on. So I want to be clear on this, okay? So if the taxpayers are forced to build something, you do not think that they have any better claim on that? Like, in those two scenarios, everyone in this room cannot say that there isn't one that's clearly preferable, which is that the taxpayers who have been forced to build and fund the maintenance of this thing get it, rather than some Chinese company who had absolutely nothing to do with it. They just get it. It just seems to me, Alex, like the answer is so obvious, but you just don't like the implication of what that answer would be.
I'm thinking like an economist who believes in getting maximum price for the assets that you sell. Obviously, I think the Swedish government should get the maximum price it can for the assets it sells and use that to do a rebate on the taxpayers of Sweden, rather than trying to give it out.
Okay, but that second part, kind of sneaks out.
Some kind of like centrally planned scheme.
Okay.
We see countries around the world try to privatize state-owned assets for the schemes that you justify, and it doesn't work. It didn't work.
Hold on. But it would
There's
go
a lot
as
of other things going on here.
Alex, but it would go as a rebate back to the taxpayer. So, like, if I were to steal money from you and buy a house, and then I'm out of money, it's rightful that it should go to you. It should just go to whoever I can get the most money for. But you see, he snuck in there on the condition that I'm giving the money back to you afterward. So that's kind of okay, why? Why should the money go back to the taxpayers?
Because they own it. Because they got fleeced.
Do they?
Because they got fleeced.
Oh, that's interesting that you said that,
fleeced.
Alex. You heard it here. That's all I needed.
Let's
because
think
they
about-
own
let's-
it.
let's
That's
think
right, Alex. They sure do.
Yeah. And let's see how they vote with their dollars, ladies and gentlemen. Not through their politicians once every 5 or 6 years, but through their tax dollars. What do? They buy goods and services from immigrants. Nobody believes this story about government ownership of property and them trying to behave like private owners.
Nobody believes this story. You just agreed with the story. It's your words. They own it. Listen, the idea that if there's a
They own the tax dollars that was taken from them that should be given back to them. That was taken from them.
Yes,
they're owed the money back from them.
Exactly. Okay.
How do Americans vote with their dollars, ladies and gentlemen? Do they vote for closed borders, or do they buy things from immigrants every day? The way they vote with their dollars matters a lot more than how they vote in a polling booth every couple years.
So the truth is that the American people really, really agree with Alex's immigration policy.
I say we should let the market decide.
Yeah.
Let's let the market decide.
I agree. I'd have no problem letting the market decide.
I'm not a socialist. I don't want the government to decide these things. Let the market decide.
Yes,
let people vote with their dollars.
The pure market decision was the UN and NGOs funding caravans by the hundreds of thousands coming over the southern border.
I oppose.
The pure free market, ladies and gentlemen.
So look,
come on. It's
Dave is trying to have it both ways. He's trying to say immigration is a government program. It only exists because of the government. But we can't liberalize immigration because then too many people will come. Which is it?
That's not having it both ways. The point is that I'm saying it's a government program.
It's not a government program any more than free trade is.
That's not true. And here's the crucial difference.
It's not any more than that.
Hold on 1 second, Alex. Here's the crucial difference between free trade. And it does seem, I don't know if you guys are picking up on this so far, but I was kind of interested in how Alex was going to grapple with the arguments I'm presenting, and it's turning out he's just not going to. But here's the major difference between free trade and immigration, right? When you have free trade, it's a voluntary interaction. A business purchases something from a foreign country. That is a voluntary interaction. When hundreds of thousands of people come into this country against the will of the domestic population, when nobody invited them here.
The will of the people.
Yes,
Come on,
Alex.
man. No, they buy.
Yes, human
But you
beings
want
have
to
wills.
buy them.
Individuals have wills. When they get together, there is a
Yes.
group of individuals.
Ah, the government
Yes.
has a will. Yeah, okay, comrade.
No, I
Listen.
didn't.
Well,
No,
No, listen.
But see, no.
Everybody
Hold on.
wants
No, I'm
to
sorry.
buy.
That's a
Immigrants
bullshit.
want to sell
That's
their
a-
labor. Americans want to
Listen.
buy their labor. We want to buy
The
and sell.
government.
It's voluntary.
By the way,
It's
Alex, here's the
voluntary.
funny thing: the government does have a will, and the people have a will. I've been talking about the will of the people. The will of the government has been very close to Alex's policy.
No, it hasn't. It
if
has
you
been
want to be honest about
95%
it.
closed borders. Ladies and gentlemen, I appeal to you to something called facts. They are the diagram in your table of what the Soviet-style immigration system actually looks like. If you think this is anything close to open borders, my God, I've got multiple bridges in this city to sell.
I
you.
want to jump in. I want to jump in and ask you a question.
ridiculous.
Okay, Alex. Dave challenged. Dave challenged one point about the apparent what his view was of the apparent inconsistency between your idea that you want an Ellis Island type system versus open borders. Are you are saying, if I understand you correctly, that all illegals would be told if you report to a checkpoint, you have a general amnesty, report to a checkpoint, and submit to the government's query about your state of health, your mental health, your criminal background, submit to all of that, and then you can qualify to be a citizen. First of all, I take it anybody who doesn't respond to that, you would join Dave in evicting them.
I think it is the government's responsibility to prove that an individual shouldn't be here, and if they are a violent and property criminal, if they're spreading a disease, if they're a terrorist or something like that, they should treat them like they do every criminal or somebody who should be in jail or somebody who should be quarantined for making everybody sick.
You would evict them as well.
Yes, absolutely. All these people who don't, who are criminals, who violate other people's rights, yes.
Comment from you, Dave, about that
So,
specifically.
do you support an Ellis Island style system to get into the country?
It'd be a vast improvement over what we have now. So yeah, it's a vast improvement. If that was the vote,
Okay, but if
then,
that,
yeah.
but so what's not an improvement? What do you support?
So I think that if you, it should be on the government to prove for each individual who wants to come to the United States that they're not allowed, with the goal of keeping out violent and property offenders or people who spread serious contagious diseases, national security threats, terrorists, and situations like that. People like that.
Yeah, but that's not the question. I'm not saying who should be kept out. I'm saying what system do you support? An Ellis Island style system? You said that would be preferable, but what would be even preferable to that?
Well, I just laid out, like if you want to come through an airport to the United States and the government says, you know, we think you're a criminal, we can prove it, and if they can prove it through due process, then they should be able to exclude you.
And when you say, okay, so if there
Sort of the same legal thing that we would apply to anybody else, like to you and I, if we were like out of jail and wanted for a crime or something.
Okay. All right.
One final question, which I want to lob at Dave and then have Alex respond. Dave, let's say that it's 1910.
Mm-hmm.
Where we sit,
You just turned 30. I love him. He's my mentor. This guy, love this guy so much.
love him back, love him back, love him back. And
And Dave said he wasn't going to piss off a Jew tonight.
For those of you guys watching, if you rewind the tape, I said I wasn't going to piss off the Jews tonight.
Dave,
There's two over here, buddy.
I love Dave. He didn't piss me off. And I turned 80 and doing something, this is the best job you could possibly have if you're 80 years old. Doesn't take up all your time, but it gives you something to do in the morning. I love it. And I love you guys being here. I love Dave being here.
Thank you.
But that,
Thanks, Gene.
We love you, Gene. It's 1910. Hold on, I'm back in my... all right.
Okay. Yes. Now, I'm going to play... just briefly, of course, the emotional card is that all four of my grandparents went through Ellis Island, and they submitted to all that bullshit. They had to prove this, they had to prove that. And by the way, the German Jews who lived uptown didn't want them to set foot in this country. All the evidence, the Italians were streaming in. Some of them, as we know from Godfather 2, were bringing mafia. The population just didn't want my grubby ancestors. I don't know if they were your grubby ancestors as well, from coming in. And they had to submit pretty much to what Alex is saying. Now, I'm happy that they did, personally, but that's irrelevant. The only question really is this. In 1910, would you have taken the same position about these immigrants moving in, sending the kids to school, that you do now? Or is it because you take a different position because there was less welfare?
Well, I mean, okay, so I essentially think, as I was saying, that the way libertarians ought to think about this is that the people of the country ought to have some say in this. And that's not to say that, this isn't what, I'm not saying the will of the government or that the government perfectly, expresses the will of the people. I'm just saying that once the government has taken from the people and created this public property, then yeah, that should be more of a factor than say what the will of some destitute person. Now, in this example, listen, it's kind of almost like asking from a libertarian position to me, look, if there were if some homeless people showed up at my house tonight and were like, hey, we want to stay here. Can we stay in your house? You got some extra room. It's like the decision ought to be mine because it's my house, and I can judge that against what. Now, if the story was that that homeless guy was like my grandfather or your grandfather, I might be very happy if they were taken in.
But
and I think at points in American history, it worked pretty well, probably better than almost any country ever, at bringing people in and assimilating them. Now, if you're asking me, do I think the fact that in 1910 there was no welfare state and no central bank and no income tax and no regulatory state, and no culture of kind of, there was a culture of you're either going to work hard and make it or you're going to have to go home. We don't have that same culture here today. And there was also a culture of embracing, at least to some degree, that capitalism and kind of rugged individual mindset. And so I think, yeah, it's probably not going to work as well in large numbers today as it did back then.
To go with that analogy real quick, if I may, the homeless person comes to your house, asks for a room, it's your property. The proper analogy is you say yes, and the government comes in and says, no, you can't. This is all, I think, the point that Dave is not looking at is the voluntary interaction that is the basis of this. Americans want to hire immigrants. They want to rent to them. They want to sell to them. They want to buy from them. They want to marry them, and all this stuff. There's a voluntary interaction at the core of this that is present in all these situations. And in that analogy used, it's the government coming in and saying, giving their answer for you about how you use your property and interact with people.
All right, can I just, let me respond, because I do think this might be right at the heart of the entire debate. This is, for Alex to say that, look, this is a voluntary interaction that the government is just getting in the middle of. The people want these immigrants in, and then the government's telling you, no, they can't. I'm not saying that that's never true in any instance. I mean, there certainly are instances where someone in America has a cousin in Italy and wants to invite him over here, and they got to go through that whole thing that Alex just showed you. And yeah, libertarians should be against that. But man, is Alex missing the forest for the trees if he thinks that's the description of immigration in present-day America. What the American people actually wanted, in terms of the popular vote, was Donald Trump back in the White House, because that's how much Biden's immigration policy pissed them. Hold on one second. Let me just finish, and then please respond. The issue is that when you have a situation like we've had over the last few years, where millions of people are pouring into the country uninvited, that the American people did not ask to be here, the scenario is not, I'm trying to have my friend into my house and the government's stopping me. The scenario that we've all been living through is the American people are screaming at the top of their lungs, we don't want this. We do not wish to have this level of immigration, and the government is saying, screw you, you're taking it anyway. And the fact that after some people have gotten in here uninvited, that some people trade with them, that does not prove that they were invited, that it's a voluntary reaction. The American people are screaming at the top of their lungs. This is not voluntary.
Wait, Gene.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that your answer to my 1910 question was good. I just want to add, as you probably know, not only did the Gentiles object to us Jews coming in, the German Jews didn't want us. If there was a vote, we were not welcome in 1910. Immigrants, generally speaking, they're strange, they're grungy. Generally speaking,
they made some good points.
Okay, but listen.
But that aside,
Guys, the American voters were furious, and rightly so, at the chaos along the border. Why were those people coming illegally? Because of the border socialism and control over this. Why are people selling drugs on the street? Because drugs are illegal. Yeah, people are mad at that. The solution is to legalize drugs. The solution is to legalize immigration. It is not the duty of libertarians to come in and go, you know what? That socialist government-controlled system that the people really want, yeah, that's great. No, our duty is to come in and say these problems, which are real problems. These are real problems with illegal immigration and border chaos, but they are caused by the government. And the solution here, as in almost every single area in our lives, is getting the government out of the way.
Okay, just a moment. I want to now give it over to audience questions.
You can clap.
The microphone is over there. And I will recognize people up at the balcony. So please ask your question. Ask a question. No need to identify yourself. Lay it on us. What's your question?
So I want to refocus the debate on the fact that it's focusing on the American present moment. So Alex, considering the debate focuses and centers the argument on present-day America, where in places like Aurora, Colorado, and parts of Ohio, immigrants are negatively impacting American communities, and where the state still compels taxpayers to fund expansive welfare systems and programs that support immigrants, and where Americans, as Dave mentioned, voted overwhelmingly for this restriction on immigration after, some would argue, after seeing European communities decimated by open border immigration. How does that impact your argument that you're making? Can you please frame it into this current moment that we're living in as Americans? Thank you.
Nope.
Could you clarify your question?
Just anchor your arguments in the current moment we're living in America as the debate resolution states. So currently in America, Americans are anti-immigration after seeing Europe decimated with open border immigration. Places like Aurora, Colorado, where these hotels were taken over, are negatively impacting the American experience.
Okay, I think I get it now.
Just anchor it in the current moment. Thank you.
All of the problems you described are caused by state intervention and state regulations in other areas of the economy. The government funding welfare systems, the government funding public schools, the government in Europe, for instance, which makes it illegal for large numbers of migrants to even get a job if they want to, forces them on the welfare. Listen, Europe has a bunch of problems. To pretend that Europe has open borders, they have a system similar to this. The problem, of course, is large amounts of illegal immigration and a lot of those migrants not being allowed to work, being forced to be on welfare. Yeah, there's lots of problems in other places, right? We're focusing on present-day America, but most of those problems, vast majority of them, are caused by other government interventions in the economy. And if this were any other public policy issue we were talking about, Dave and I would agree that that is the issue. The issue is the government policies and restrictions on our liberty, not the people necessarily who take advantage of it.
Coming from you, Jay.
I think, listen, I think this is a problem that some guys at Cato and libertarians in general, libertarians I love, have a problem of doing, is that sometimes we almost want to impose the way we would like it to be onto the world. This is not Alex, by the way. I'm making fun of other people at Cato here. But this is my favorite thing that I've ever seen from Cato. This was a study in 2021, and they did a write-up of it. What they found is that, and this was really good numbers, they were celebrating how high the numbers were. 23% of Americans wanted a high level of immigration. 68% of Americans wanted a low level of immigration. 9% of Americans wanted no immigration. Cato wrote this up and said, only 9% of Americans want zero immigration, 91% welcome immigration. Do you see how you could sometimes put, listen, I understand what Alex is saying. We have large areas of agreement about how much government interventions create other problems that then beget other government interventions. That's true. If you think the only reason why people were like upset at the Biden immigration was the chaos at the border, as your guy,
Yeah, and the knock-on
hold on, but let me just
effects of
like say this.
yeah.
As your guy said, since 1965, for most of the years, it's been single digits of Americans who supported high levels of immigration. The truth is that the American people don't want these people here. And the problem is that if you're not willing to grapple with that kind of uncomfortable reality, you're going to get it all. You could run me all the regressions you want to about how immigrants expand the economy, they contribute more to the economy. Therefore, if we have Alex's immigration policy, which will probably lead to what, 5, 10, 20 million immigrants coming here next year, we're going to get this big explosion in GDP. Let me tell you what we're going to get. We're going to get Pinochet elected president. That's what you're going to get if you have immigration.
I sure wish you appealed to libertarian principles as much as you appeal to public opinion.
I actually am.
Okay.
No, you're actually not.
appealing
All
to
you're
both.
doing is democratic fundamentalism. What does the median voter want? What does this poll say? What does this survey say?
Well, Alex,
this debate is about libertarianism
Yes.
and libertarian principles. I wish you would stick to that rather than making these arguments about, oh, gee, I wonder what the moderate Republican wants. We
Hold
got to
on,
do what
Alex,
that guy wants.
Alex, I'm sorry. Hold on.
Who cares?
Okay, fine. You can say that. You can say, who cares? Listen, I do think in my opening, I was making an appeal to libertarian principles. If you don't agree with them, that's fine. Let me tell you this. When you say, who cares, you're making empirical claims about what's going to happen if we have higher levels of immigration. When you say this appeal to democracy, it's called, something libertarians don't like that much, living in reality. That's what we live in. We live in a country that has votes. We have a presidential election every 4 years. What was the result of record high numbers of people coming into this country illegally? The result was Donald Trump winning every swing state and the popular vote. You guys want to deal with reality a little bit? What do you think it would be if we took the numbers that came in under Joe Biden and multiplied them by 5 or 10? What do you think this country is going to look like? And is that just me making an appeal to what the average voter thinks? I'm making an appeal to what type of country our children are going to grow up in.
And Dave has the gall to call me a Beltway libertarian? He calls me a Beltway libertarian and Cato? That is the most in the swamp argument
now,
that I've
now,
ever heard from a libertarian. My God, man. Where are your principles?
Somebody in the cheap seats, you got a question?
That's a derogatory term.
Please. What's your question,
I'm sorry,
sir?
seating challenged individual.
Yeah,
What's your
seating
question, sir?
challenged, seating challenged.
Ask your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. It's been wonderful, great styles. Coming to a libertarian debate, you guys are talking a lot from the government perspective. I'm just really surprised because at the individual perspective, from individual liberty, looking from the immigrants' perspective, right? What have they done wrong? You understand? When you're talking about immigration, you're prohibiting them from entering public spaces, from interacting in local marketplaces. Those are normally rights that we really protect as libertarians. So I'm just a little confused as to what their crime is and why they've met the high bar of prohibiting them from that fundamental liberty.
The crime of it sounds like it's a question just you, Dave.
I got the
Take it,
question.
Dave.
Well, I mean, I'm certainly not claiming that the immigrants have done anything wrong. I'm not saying they're bad people any more than I would be saying that if 5 homeless people knocked on my door and were like, hey, can we stay the night? Like, it's not that they're bad people. It's just I got a wife and 2 kids in here. And, like, that's my it's not, I'm not a bad person for being like, no, I'm sorry, you can't come in. This is for my family. And the question of, like, restricting liberty, it's like, look, there is a legitimate restriction of liberty. If somebody is invited to the United States of America and they're not leeching off of the taxpayer and they're invited by a host and the government says, no, you can't come, no question, that's a violation of liberty. But I'm sorry, where exactly is the natural right to enter property uninvited that you do not own?
That's not what we're talking about.
That is what...
We're talking about
No, it's not what
private
you're talking about.
property.
It's reality.
We're talking about private property. I'm saying you should be able to invite anybody on your property from anywhere in the world without asking for permission from the state. Dave is saying you got to ask permission from Dear Leader.
No.
Come on.
No, hold on. But
This
you're
is the
just,
easiest thing in the
Alex,
world.
well, it is if you completely misunderstand what I'm saying. I agree with you. You should be able to invite anybody you want onto your property.
So he agrees.
Yeah, you'll get it.
one.
Don't worry, hang in there.
Yeah.
I agree with that. But that's not what characterizes the overwhelming majority of the people who have come.
Yes, it is.
It's not what characterizes the overwhelming majority of the people who have come into this country, specifically over the last few years. What you've had is waves of people uninvited by the millions. That's what's been going on, and that's what the American people are objecting to. And so, I know Alex likes to say they're all nativists or something like that, but I think I would recommend you listen to some of these people. There are very specific grievances that they have. Towns that have been completely transformed, where people are living there for 4 generations. 4 generations they've been paying property taxes, and all of a sudden the local public school is majority not speaking English. It's made up by students that have come from this incredibly brutal journey where many of them have been abused. Now, again, to your point, this doesn't mean I think those kids are bad kids. I don't think the kids who made this horrible journey who have been abused are bad kids, but also I don't really think I would want my kids going to school with a bunch of traumatized kids who don't speak English.
He doesn't think they're
that makes
bad.
me
He
a
doesn't think
native.
they're bad, but he wants the state to
Do you
use its
boo for
power
that?
to let the state
Okay.
use its power to push them out.
You boo for that. You boo for me not wanting my children to be at school
You
with
want
traumatized
the government
kids.
to go after
No.
them with
No,
guns
hold
and
on.
deport them and take away their property
Wait, hold on, Alex.
and shove them out of this country.
No, that's not what they
that
booed
earns
for.
a boo at a libertarian
booed,
event.
They booed for me saying that I don't want my 6- and 3-year-old kids to be going to school with traumatized kids who don't speak the language. And they booed for that.
Great argument for
Libertarians-
school choice.
Yes, we
Not
all
an
agree
argument
on
for
that,
closed
Alex.
borders.
Yes, no
It's
kidding.
not an argument for closed borders. It's an argument for school choice.
It's
Thank you.
actually, it's an argument for both.
No, it's not. It's not. It's
Next question.
You guys spent
a
the
whip?
debate discussing what the federal government should and shouldn't do. But nobody brought up whether the federal government is actually authorized to do it. Now, Lysander Spooner notwithstanding, the Constitution is the law of the land. Do the two of you believe that the Constitution authorizes the federal government to place restrictions on immigration when it comes to peaceful people? And if you do, where in the Constitution is this authorization granted?
Sounds like a challenge for you, Dave.
It's for both.
Well, sounds like
I mean, I'm not really a constitutionalist or any type of expert on it. I mean, I don't.
You'll pass.
I'm arguing how I think libertarians ought to feel about this. And there's lots of great things in the Constitution, but there's been lots of bad things in there too. So
you'll pass.
I don't know.
Any response from you?
Happy to share this with Dave if you want, the Constitution. But there is no enumerated power for Congress to control immigration specifically. It was made up during the Progressive era by a Supreme Court that said, it's like an inherent power of the sovereign, that mighty magical beast that channels the will of the people, the Leviathan. It's an inherent power because of magic words and stuff. So no, there's no
Wasn't it,
power.
Alex? I'm sure you know this better than me, but wasn't it run by the states at the beginning of the Union? Wasn't it?
So it's like states in theory had that power. Almost none of them exercised it. So Castle Island in New York, they set up a place that was kind of like a pre-Ellis Island. But basically in the 85 years before the feds took it over, the states deported on total, I've been able to count about 7,000 people total, and most of them actually to other states. So basically they shoved them all in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I want to apologize.
Hey, now
Keystone.
we may have found a policy we can both support. Yeah, all right.
I support shoving everybody we don't want in Pennsylvania.
Sorry,
Sorry, Philly, but you gotta make it
that
better.
one cool part.
I want to apologize to the audience. Guys, this will have to be our last question, and you can come to the party and confront the debaters afterwards. Final question from the balcony. Take it away.
Thank you. The resolution references peaceful and healthy people, seemingly off the table that non-peaceful or non-healthy people may have the right to come here without restrictions. You, Alex, spoke to that a little bit, and you said they might have due process when they get here, so they'd be innocent until proven guilty, rather than, I guess, the way it is now, where you're saying they have to prove their innocence. I'm wondering how that would work, because, right, that process begins when a crime happens and an accusation is levied. And then there's due process for that, for the state or whoever to prove that the crime occurred. I don't think, to me, that could happen very easily in a large-scale Ellis Island type setting where people are coming in and no accusations have been levied against them. So I'm wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of little practical concerns. Listen, one of the things that I think Dave and I probably agree on is we are very, very far from a libertarian world in practically every way, right? Now, there's lots of ways that we can imagine this stuff being done. You have one of the ways it was done before Ellis Island, actually, when criminals were barred, is that they usually look at like the manifests and basically just be like, hey, you're covered in face tattoos. The only people from Italy covered in face tattoos are criminals. We're just gonna talk to you for a few minutes and check it out. You know, but there's lots of practicalities, but man, I spend a lot of time in DC talking with bureaucrats and politicians about these things, and I'm just looking forward to having a drink so we can talk about principles.
You know, I think that there's, okay, so one of the things that's kind of been interesting in this whole debate is that there just is this disconnect between how libertarians like to think about these things versus the reality of what we're living through. And I understand that. In my heart of hearts, I really don't ever want to be advocating that the government do anything to anybody. But the idea that you're going to say you have due process for, and there's very different arguments here. Making the argument that you have due process for someone before they're deported from this country is a very different argument than saying that anybody from anywhere in the world, whether invited or uninvited, has some due process right, like as if they get the presumption of you're allowed to be here before they can be pushed away. Look, again, there's just no way to do this without having a dramatic increase in the... Look, I'll just say this. Do you know, this is one of the craziest stats, and it was a little bit because the height was in the middle of Joe Biden's administration, but we had record high border crossings under Joe Biden, and then we have record low border crossings right now under Donald Trump. And so much of that isn't even just like a policy change. It's just like what the president is saying, what the impression is, that the bat signal that goes out to the world. If we were to say right now that we have Alex's immigration policy, anybody can come, and actually the burden is on us to prove that you're sick, or you're a terrorist, or you're a violent, whatever that means, we're convicted of a violent crime once, are you being violent right now, whatever exactly that means. I mean, you'd be sending out the bat signal to the world. This is why I was saying I'm not making an appeal to democracy or an appeal to popularity. I am making an appeal to reality. And I just don't know if libertarians really appreciate how destabilizing this would
Dave,
be for our society.
Could you start your 5 minutes of summary? Because it's your turn for summary. So please.
You know, I was done right there, and now I'm a little mad at you. That seemed unnecessary. So, no, I'm sorry. Okay, can I sit here, or are we going back to the podiums?
You can sit on the floor, you can sit on the stage.
All right. Well, look, okay, let me... All right, 5 minutes of summary here. I try to touch on a few things here. Look, I really do, look, I have a lot of respect for Alex, and despite what we've had on Twitter, I actually like Alex, and I'm really grateful that he came and did this here. I've enjoyed this. And I just don't think Alex is really grappling with the arguments that I've laid out. And so let me respond to a few of the things that he said. Number one, the idea that as he spent a lot of his time arguing about the way Donald Trump has been implementing this has been bad, or the way the government implements this is bad, and then said, well, I can't divorce myself from the government if if I support a policy, the government's going to violate rights. Yeah, but this would be an argument for murder being legal. I mean, if you want to say murder is going to be illegal, we know for a fact that the monopoly known as the government is going to mess that up. There are going to be people who go to jail and they were not guilty. That is going to happen, okay? But at the same time, I think it's reasonable saying like, current environment, modern America, just saying murder's legal now, that really isn't going to be a great scenario. I don't think that's going to work out very well. Now, Alex also made the point, which I do not think is true, that if I was applying this to anything else, you know, if we were applying this to guns, he made the comparison to having kids. Oh, these kids are going to change the culture. But what's the major difference here, okay? The difference is that, obviously, having a child is a natural right. Obviously, like, having a gun is a natural right. I think more reasonably, the question would be, do I apply this within reason on government property at all? So would it be reasonable for, let's say, the government to have a rule about how you can't shoot up heroin on a public street? Yeah, actually, I do kind of think that would be reasonable. I think it's totally reasonable from the libertarian perspective to be like, hey, you can do that, but you got to take it home. You can't do it here. We will remove you. You don't have a right to be here. Is it reasonable, as I laid out in the beginning, for the government to have rules about who's allowed and not allowed to enter a public school? Yeah, I actually do think that. I think there are many reasonable restrictions that the government can have on public property, and obviously it does not extend from that, you could think of bad examples of it. You could extend this principle and think of some pretty disastrous reductio absurdums, but you could also recognize that the reductio absurdum to having zero restrictions would be equally as bad. You simply just can't operate a society this way. And so I think that Alex has kind of dodged the real central reality here, which is that it's not just that there was chaos at the border that was caused by the fact that we have this crazy over-regulated immigration system. That's true. That's certainly, it certainly is true that if you just said, everyone's allowed to come here, then yeah, you wouldn't have had the exact same chaos at the border. But listen, man, as I said before, the American people are screaming at the top of their lungs and have been for decades and decades and decades. They don't want this level of immigration. And I really do think that kind of, to me, the moment of the debate was Alex saying that they own it, about the Swedish taxpayers. Well, if that's the case, like if the case is that they own it, or the case is that even if this factory, and listen, Alex, he's a very smart economist, so he made a fair point. Maybe if they could sell that factory to the highest bidder and then gave it back to the taxpayers, that would be a better deal than just directly giving the stock to the taxpayers. But I think the point still remains that we're all acknowledging that that taxpayer has more of a claim to it than somebody from the rest of the world. And let me just tell you this very, very quickly, and then I'll wrap up on this. If I go over by a few seconds, Alex, you get more time. Just very, very quickly. This is one of the things that turned me around on immigration, because I used to completely agree with Alex. In fact, I would have taken it a little bit further. I was an open borders guy. And I saw this interview of this guy who was an immigration restrictionist. And they were asking him why he supports these immigration restrictions. And he literally said what I was talking about just at the end of the question and answer segment. They lived in a border town in Texas. And he was like, he goes, I've lived here, I'm in the same house as my grandfather. We've lived in this town for generations. He goes, my grandkids go to the public school. I went to that school. My father went to that school. My grandfather went to that school. We've been paying property taxes this entire time. And in just a few years, the school's been transformed. And it's now majority of the kids don't speak English. Many of them have been traumatized. I know some people mock me over that. Let me tell you something I know about you that you don't know already. You don't have kids. And for the rest of people in this crowd, for the rest of the people who do have children, you can understand where, like, that'd be very concerning. And you would sit here and go, hey, I've been the taxpayer this whole time. This money was stolen from me. He wasn't a libertarian. He may not have said it exactly like that, but it has been. Like, how come I don't get a say in this? And when the numbers are so overwhelming, the American people do not want this. And if there's one thing libertarians should understand, you're going to force something this major on the American people when they do not want it, expect a backlash. And it's not going to be what you guys want to see. It's not going to be what any of us want to see. Thank you guys very much.
5 minutes of rebuttal from Alex.
Travel is a natural right. Don't believe me, just read John Locke's essay on naturalization. John Locke, one of the founders and most important people in the Enlightenment and a great inspiration to libertarians since then. Dave made the point in the last several minutes, right before his 5-minute thing, about how Alex has this presumption of liberty. You're darn right I do. You're darn right I have a presumption of liberty when it comes to immigration and everything else. Michael Huemer, the libertarian philosopher in Colorado, who's written some of the best essays on this and other libertarian topics, also calls it a presumption of liberty. So I'm like very happy to be lumped in with what I consider to be the most prominent libertarian philosopher and anarcho-capitalist in the world today, who agrees with me on this topic. When it comes to all of the problems that Dave has pointed out, you know, public schools, welfare, all this stuff, I agree. Great arguments against public schools. Great arguments against welfare. Also, great arguments, but not good arguments against immigration. They are arguments that are just as good against having children as they are against immigration. Take every argument he raised and replace the word immigrant with having children, and see if that argument makes sense. Because the logic is identical. It is identical. And if you oppose government restrictions on peaceful people or on just anybody having kids, then you have to oppose government restrictions on peaceful and healthy people crossing the border. We want to see continuously, and I don't think Dave has dealt with this once, he continuously assumes that immigrants coming here are uninvited or they're not welcome. Well, you know, I want to point you guys to something called the market economy and labor markets. People, Americans, want to hire these folks. They want to rent to them. They want to buy from them. They want to sell to them. They want to deal with them. That is the vast, vast majority of immigration in the United States. That's why people come here unlawfully, and the government gets in the way from stopping them. When I came here this morning from Virginia on a train, nobody's going to make the argument that I violated a bunch of people's rights on the way just because I bought a ticket and got a hotel room and bought a slice of pizza on the way here. This was all voluntary. So what if, instead of taking the train from Virginia, I took the train from Canada? Is there any difference? Borders are ethically irrelevant when it comes to libertarianism. They are irrelevant when it comes to this stuff. The borders exist to keep out other governments. They do not exist to keep out peaceful and healthy people, and that's the way that we should take it, and that's the way that we should look on this. Dave, I think, is using the language of libertarianism to justify some preferences that I don't think are supported or at all consistent with libertarian principles. There are really only two political movements in the world, and there always have been only two. On one side is power, and the other side is individual liberty. And I want you to think to yourself tonight, who was the person up here defending liberty, and who was defending power? Who was the person who was supporting the power of the state, funded by taxpayers, to send armed guards and armed individuals to tear people away from their voluntary contracts, mutually beneficial relationships, and remove them from the United States? Who is the person who is in favor of having restrictions on the border, to check people out, to build a wall, to lionize and to support President Trump saying things, putting up a bat signal that stops people from coming here? Do you know why that bat signal is effective? It's supported by violence. It's supported by the state. It's supported by trillions of dollars of taxpayer money. It's supported by activating the military and the largest law enforcement apparatus in the history of this country. That is the pro-power position that is dominated and supported by Dave in this debate. My position is one of liberty. My position is the one that Americans and immigrants should be free to interact without government interference on the terms that they mutually agree upon. That is individual liberty. That is individual freedom. That is free market capitalism. That is libertarianism. Thank you.
Is Tootsie Roll available? Do we have the results? I think we do have the results, okay? All right, let's see now. Oops, I got to put on my reading glasses. Okay, yeah. Okay, the yes vote, that was yes for Dave, rose by 21.5 points. So that's the number to beat. Dave picked up 21.5 points. The no vote picked up 15.9 points. Pretty close, pretty close. But the Tootsie Roll, where is it? Oh. The Tootsie Roll goes to Dave. Please come to the party. Follow the crowd. 2 blocks uptown.